This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Well, welcome. My name is Phil Thompson, and I'm the director of the Aquinas Center of Theology. And on behalf of the Aquinas Center of Theology, Emory University, and the Candler School of Theology, I want to welcome you to the second major Catholic speaker event here tonight. Last year, how many people were here last year? We have any people who were at the Cardinal Casper event? A little different weather scenario. Last year it was snowing. We didn't know whether we were going to hold the event. And tonight, we bring Notre Dame and we get sun, beautiful weather. So there's another person who's going to welcome you here tonight, and that's Dean Jan Love of the Candler School of Theology, who has partnered with us for this event. And we feel very fortunate to have such a good partner. And to welcome you to this event on behalf of the university, Jan Love.
Good evening, everyone. I welcome you to Emory University for this great occasion. More than a year ago, those of you who were here when Cardinal Casper was here will remember that it was only briefly at that point that Newsweek magazine noted that for many decades, colleges and universities have been at best ambivalent and at worst hostile toward the study and practice of religion. Unlike other large research-oriented institutions of higher education, however, Emory University is neither indifferent to nor embarrassed by religion. Rather, this university is eager to address an urgent need at home and abroad. That is, helping different religions cooperate rather than collide. Faculty, administrators, staff, and students provide leadership to address religious issues through teaching, research, scholarship, health care, social action, and vibrant religious life. On our campus, there are regular opportunities for worship, prayer, and meditation for all the major religious traditions, as well as numerous activities that put followers of different faith traditions in close conversation with one another across interfaith dialogue. I also, however, want to welcome you on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students of Candler School of Theology. At Candler, we proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ and nurture students' calls to be faithful and creative leaders within the Christian tradition. We have about 50 faculty who teach about 500 students. 70%, 70%, of whom will find their way to become pastors of congregations across Georgia, across the Southeast, across the country of the United States, and indeed across the world. Thanks to the heritage of this great university, as well as the dedicated and even prescient leadership of President Jim Wagner and Provost Earl Lewis, we who serve Candler are privileged to carry out our mission of training Christian leaders in an extraordinary educational environment where hearts and minds engage across deeply held religious differences, preparing us all to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Into this context, we're most privileged to welcome Father John Jenkins, President of the University of Notre Dame. Through the strong academic tradition of that institution, and particularly through the leadership of President Jenkins in recent years, Notre Dame continues to make a remarkable contribution to the full exploration of the role of religion in public life. I want to thank the Aquinas Center and its director, Dr. Philip Thompson, for inviting Candler into this partnership for the second annual Major Catholic Speaker Series. One of the most joyful aspects of this evening is the presence of so many of you who've come from across campus, from across the city, from across the region, and even for some of you from across the nation to engage with President Jenkins. Your presence here tonight is a powerful testimony to and affirmation of Emory's commitment to engaging the public role of religion. Thanks so much for coming, and welcome to Emory University.
Well, it is now my pleasure to introduce Father Jenkins. The reason we invite a major speaker like Father Jenkins, the president of the University of Notre Dame, is to assist, as we say in our mission statement, inquiring persons to enhance their knowledge of the living Catholic tradition so they can better engage the spiritual and moral life of the church. Famous theologian Jaroslav Pelikan said that a tradition is the living faith of the dead. It is not the dead faith of the living. And he means by that it's a living faith. It is something which we must explore, for which we must apply our reason to, right? And to invite a wide array of speakers to address important issues concerning our faith. Well, this year's speaker, as I mentioned, is Father John Jenkins, and I have an apology for you, President Jenkins, because on one of our flyers we left off the letter CSC after his name. That indicates that he's a priest of the Holy Cross. I, of all people who taught for 6 years at Holy Cross University, should know that. But this is about respectful conversation, so perhaps he'll forgive me for that. A Notre Dame alumnus, Father Jenkins earned his bachelor and master's degree in philosophy from the University of Notre Dame in 1976 and 1978, respectively. He was ordained a priest of the Congregation of the Holy Cross in 1983. He earned a doctoral degree in philosophy from Oxford University in 1987 and 89, and a master's divinity degree from the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley in 1988. Another reason we like Father Jenkins is that he's a noted Aquinas scholar, and it's perhaps not surprising the Aquinas Center would have such an Aquinas scholar. He's written numerous articles for the Journal of Philosophy, Medieval Philosophy and Theology, the Journal of Religious Ethics, and he has a book, Knowledge and Faith in Thomas Aquinas. In 2004, he went from a promising career in scholarship to becoming the president of the University of Notre Dame. And I don't know what he was thinking on the day that he was inaugurated president of Notre Dame, but if anybody knows about the history of Notre Dame and being the president of Notre Dame, you know in some sense you're going to be in the heart of the hurricane. And I mean by that when you're president of Notre Dame, Catholics in particular, and this I want to explain something to our non-Catholic people at this audience, Catholics look at the University of Notre Dame very differently than they look at any other university or college that is Catholic in the United States. We feel a possessiveness about the University of Notre Dame. It's our school, whether we went there, attended there, know anybody who went there, or anything else. We feel like this is our university. And that can be a good thing. That can also be a difficult thing, because you're going to be placed at the heart of what it means to be a Catholic and how Catholics conduct themselves in higher education. So when you approach that office and you accept it, you approach it with courage, I think, to be able to make your decisions. When he was inaugurated, President Jenkins stated, "My presidency will be driven by a wholehearted commitment to uniting and integrating these two indispensable and wholly compatible strands of higher learning, academic excellence, and religious faith. And this is a point, by the way, at a lunch today with President Jenkins and President Wagner of Emory University, that both of them welcome the absolute need for bringing religion into dialogue with other aspects of university life. And if you know anything about university life, that is not true of all schools in the United States by any means. So I think we should be very thankful that we have two educational leaders who take this position. President Jenkins' belief in a Catholic university as a forum for dialogue in the context of faith was tested when some criticized his invitation to President Barack Obama as Notre Dame's 2009 commencement speaker. And I've gotten a few emails reminding me of that. In response, President Jenkins said, quote, "Notre Dame belongs to an academic tradition of nearly 1,000 years, born of the Church's teaching that human reason, tempered by faith, is a gift of God, a path to religious truth, and a means for seeking the common good in secular life. It is out of this duty to serve the common good that we seek to foster dialogue with all people of goodwill, regardless of faith background or perspective. We will listen to all views and always bear witness for what we believe." It is in this spirit that I ask you to welcome Father Jenkins and to hear his lecture here tonight.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Given that very generous welcome and that wonderful warm round of applause, I think I'll just not give my talk. I think I've hit my peak. But it's just a tremendous honor to be here at this great university, Emory University, at this distinguished lecture series and in this vibrant Aquinas Center. I'm just tremendously honored and tremendously appreciative for your presence here tonight. As was said, what I'll talk about is a talk entitled Passionate Convictions and Respectful Conversations. Last week, as we all know, Democrats and Republicans reached an agreement that kept the United States government from shutting down. That's the good news. But the time it took to reach that agreement and the manner of reaching it were both dispiriting. That was captured in a headline in the Washington Post the next day, which read, "Bitter fight makes both sides and Washington itself look bad." As the article read, quote, "Washington is still broken. Given the tortured negotiations and the claims and counterclaims, the public is likely to find fault with both political parties." The latest conduct of the nation's business, I believe, is no aberration, but a fair reflection of the politics of the age we're in. Ideological differences seem more extreme, positions more entrenched, battles more acrimonious, compromise less common, friendly social relations among members of different parties more rare, and attacks on opponents more personal. Such divisiveness makes politics not only unpleasant, it makes it harder to come together to address our nation's challenges. If we choose to attack our opponents before we have taken time to understand them, if we prefer denunciations to genuine dialogue, if we seek political victory rather than constructive compromise, if it takes the specter of a government shutdown to force us into a grudging agreement, we will not be able to find solutions to the problems before us. Many factors have contributed to the current polarization, but one important element, pains me to admit, has been the rise of religious and moral issues in public debate. Whether the issue is abortion, same-sex marriage, embryonic stem cell research, prayer in schools, or the proper role of government in addressing social issues, political appeals are often made to our religious convictions and the moral framework closely associated with them. Political debate is inevitable and can easily turn harsh. But when the debate centers on issues at the moral core of our lives, it is all the easier for the debate to become angry. When an opponent rejects my view on a matter of morality, he or she can be seen to reject the whole frame that gives my life meaning. We're sometimes advised to avoid discussing religion or politics. But when we debate these moral issues, we are discussing both religion and politics. And the discussion doesn't go on for long before frequently the shouting and name-calling begin. As these issues, moral issues, have risen in prominence in recent decades, political party affiliation has been increasingly correlated with the degree of a person's religious practice. It's long been the case, of course, that a person's religious denomination was correlated with party preference. But now, a strong correlate is the degree of religious practice, with those who are more religiously observant in the traditional sense tending to migrate to the Republican Party, and the less traditionally observant and more secular to the Democratic Party. We thus have a situation in which the choice of political party is strongly, perhaps even dominantly, influenced by our deepest religious and moral conviction. This sets the stage for a standoff on religious issues, and at least partly explains the current divisiveness. For while aligning a political party according to economic self-interest can lead to acrimonious division, certainly, economic matters are generally more susceptible to agreement. One group can accept some, but not all of what it wants, and the other can do the same without feeling it has compromised on a core religious conviction. Our religious and moral convictions have a certain ultimacy that resists compromise and lends itself to portraying one's cause as divinely inspired and one's opponent as not simply wrong, but evil. When the religious differences are taken up in the context of a partisan debate, the air of antagonism that can characterize an agreement on core moral convictions can permeate the political debate across the entire range of issues. And on each issue, the antagonism provoked in earlier debates arises again as people say semi-consciously to themselves or others, those are the people that opposed us on abortion or on stem cell research or on same-sex marriage. And they look at the other side through the same angry lens that developed in debates over these core moral issues. This intensifies the challenge of creating more civil public debate. If a debate on tax cuts were taken up and people with the same religious practices were evenly distributed on either side of the tax question, it would be harder to demonize the other side in a way that we so easily do today. It's just harder to generate the same disrespect towards someone whose religious views and practices you share. Politics has always seen profit in demonizing the other side. And the fact that the parties can be divided across lines of religious views and practices makes this approach impossible to resist. In recent decades, political activists in the two major parties have framed the issue and the candidates in a struggle between good and evil. Even if most voters reject this dichotomy, they can do little to change it. They can only respond to the choices they are given. And it's not surprising that respectful, reasoned, constructive dialogue seems ever more rare. It should be no surprise that faith and religious-based moral convictions would play such a prominent role in public debate. For those of us who have faith, religious convictions are critical to defining our identity and forming our social networks. They shape our understanding of the highest individual good and purpose and our understanding of what society's highest good and purpose should be. They are the source of personal and communal challenge to do good, and they console us in times of turmoil, struggle, and tragedy. Yet while religious commitment has clearly played a beneficial role in, for example, the struggle to abolish slavery, history has shown that it can be used to fuel prejudice, intolerance of dissent, and even slaughter from the excesses of medieval crusades to sectarian killing in Northern Ireland to the tragedy of 9/11. Religious convictions have an almost unique motivational power. If we appeal to them, we must acknowledge that that power can be turned both to good and to evil. The distinctive motivational power of religious convictions is perhaps most evident in the tradition of martyrdom, prominent in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The book of Maccabees in the Hebrew Bible tells us of the story of the sons of Maccabee who were ready to die rather than be forced by foreign occupiers to transgress the Torah. Christian martyrs, since the first martyr, St. Stephen, whose death by stoning is recounted in the Acts of the Apostles in the Christian New Testament, have been specially revered in the Christian tradition. And in Islam, a martyr, a shaheed, lays down his or her life fulfilling a religious command as a witness to righteousness. If the ultimacy of the martyr's sacrifice, it is the ultimacy of the martyr's sacrifice that makes him or her so revered in these religious traditions, for their commitment corresponds to the ultimacy of the demand that faith makes upon us. The teachings of faith play a central role in defining our relationship with God, our place in the world, what we ought to do, and what we can hope for. The truths are of such transcendent importance that when necessary, the martyr is willing to sacrifice his or her life rather than neglect them. That transcendent and all-encompassing character of faith is shown not only in the martyr's willingness to accept violent death for its sake, but also in the enduring and wholehearted commitment of countless faithful believers throughout the course of their lives. Sister Mary Scullion, a Catholic nun, and Joan McCannon, a committed lay woman, began in 1989 a short-term emergency center for homeless men who were not welcome in the city shelters of Philadelphia. You can imagine what a threatening group that would be. Gathering others around them and receiving a few seminal gifts, they worked over the years to found Project Home, whose motto is, quote, "No one has a home until everyone has a home," unquote, and whose mission statement proclaims that, quote, "Our work is rooted in the strong spiritual conviction of the dignity of every human person," unquote. Project Home is credited with cutting the homeless population of Philadelphia in half. And because of its educational programs, 95% of those who cycle through those programs never live on the street again. And it's difficult to come to Atlanta and not recall the example of a Baptist preacher from this great city, Martin Luther King Jr. He fought the injustice of discrimination, but always rejected hatred. He wrote, quote, "In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hate," unquote. Dr. King died a martyr's death on a porch in Memphis. What makes his example more intriguing that his nonviolent tactics were inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, a Hindu. "Your love, O Lord, is better than life," writes the psalmist. The martyr's sacrifice and the humble, enduring dedication of a Sister Scullion, Joan McCannon, Dr. King, and countless other holy people are living testimony to that statement. History sadly shows, however, that religious convictions can inspire holy people to give their lives, can also inspire others to take life. The bloodletting of the religious wars in the 17th century, or evidence of that, as are violent acts by religious adherents in more recent times. In an important work by the name of American Grace, political scientists Robert Putnam and David Campbell have shown that a strong religious life, regardless of one's denomination, is correlated with a wide range of positive social behaviors, from volunteering time and contributing resources, to helping the needy, assisting a neighbor or a stranger, belonging to a civic organization, or participating in solving a civic problem. Yet the authors unflinchingly point out that a strong religious life is also correlated with less tolerance for dissenting views. Seizing on the negative manifestation of religious conviction, aggressive secularists argue that it would be better if religion were excluded from public debate. If our public life were rid of appeal to religious convictions, it is argued, it would be rid of much irrationality, intolerance, and acrimony. No doubt, such uncompromising secularism is fueled by the more extreme expressions of religious tolerance and divisiveness, and vice versa. But of course, any balanced view of the role of religion must acknowledge that eliminating it from public life would remove the range of positive social attitudes and behaviors that come with it. And even if a secularist were to argue that such a thing would be desirable, it is hard to see how it would be possible. Politics is an ongoing discussion of how to make laws, collect revenues, and spend money in ways that advance our values, and the voters, even if they wish to do so, would find it hard to engage in these debates without bringing in the values that define them. Religious convictions will always make themselves felt in our national debate. And so the critical, practical questions for us are, how can religious convictions and our religious institutions be a vibrant, constructive force for good in our national life rather than a source of acrimony and divisiveness? How can the ultimacy which characterizes our religious convictions remain the motive for living holy and generous lives while not serving as a tool to create divisions and demonize opponents? In this address, I'll be speaking as a Catholic and invited by the Aquinas Center, a Catholic center, so what I say will be contextualized by that Catholic context. But I think what I say can apply to other religious traditions and also to perhaps some of the conflicts that don't have to do with religion. Among those who share the desire to encourage the positive contribution of religion while reducing the negative, some will advocate what's called a relativist account of religious beliefs and claims. You academics know what that means. I'll explain what it is to those who don't spend their days reading philosophy and theology. They will argue that if religious claims are not seen as absolute, then we remove the win-lose characteristics of religious debate, the characteristics that is the source of so much heat, and that prompts debates to be framed in the form, if you're right, then I'm wrong, and I'm definitely not wrong. Relativism is a theory about the truth of religious and associated assertions that holds that they're meaningful and true, but their truth is indexed, as it were, to the individual or group that holds them. One suggested version of this relativist view holds that a claim may be true for an individual who believes it, while another contradictory claim may be true for another individual who believes that claim. Or alternatively, a relativist may claim that a claim is true for a community that holds it, while a contradictory claim may also at the same time be true for another community that holds that second claim. So I may believe strongly that Jesus is the second person of the divine Trinity, and another person may believe just as strongly that God is one and Jesus is a human prophet. Or to change examples, I may believe that marriage can only be a commitment between a man and a woman, while you may believe that there is no valid reason to deny marriage to a same-sex couple. The relativist would say, well, the first claim is true for me or my group, while the second claim is, at the same time, just as true for you and your group. We can perhaps get an intuitive sense of a relativist claim by considering that the religious and moral assertions, as the relativists understand them, are analogous to expressions of taste or preference. You and I may frequent the gelato shop down the street, and I may love the chocolate mocha, and you are just as passionate about the pistachio. We may engage in heated discussion about the relative merits of our favorite flavors, and we each may try to recruit our friends to become adherents of our preferences. But although we may feel strongly about our favorite flavors, and though we may appear to disagree, we really don't. It's true that chocolate mocha is the tastiest flavor for me, and pistachio is the tastiest flavor for you. But we have to admit there's no tastiest flavor independent of the taster, and so no way to appeal our dispute to an external objective standard. Once we accept this, we can continue to be passionately committed to our preferences and even engage in playful banter, but we recognize we do not disagree. Of course, debates about ice cream are trivial, religious views about abortion or the nature of marriage or not. Nevertheless, the relativist holds they are similar in that in each case, the truth of the claims are relative to the group's attitudes. And so people may assert seemingly contradictory claims and still not disagree. Therefore, there's no point in arguing about the truth of our separate claims according to the relativist. The only issue worth discussing is how we will live together harmoniously while following our respective beliefs. It's perhaps a concession to a relativist view that we sometimes speak of religious preferences rather than religious beliefs. Yet despite the popularity of this account, and in spite of its often useful ability to allow the discussions of a deep articles of faith in ways that do not offend other faiths, I do not believe it is tenable as an understanding, as a theory of religious and moral beliefs. Many have offered, and I'm not going to go into it, theoretical critiques of why relativism won't work, that it's even a self-contradictory positions. I'm not going to go into those, but I want to offer rather a separate critique because I believe relativism doesn't solve our practical challenge, the practical challenge of how religious convictions can remain the positive force in society while not becoming a source of divisiveness. So it fails on both counts. Let me explain that. First of all, the kind of relativism I'm talking about, theological relativism, solves the problem of religious conflict only if you and I believe that it's an accurate account of our religious claims, that, this is true for me, it's true for you. But even if it's true that there's no absolute truth I express when I say Jesus Christ is true God and true man, I nevertheless may believe there is. And if I believe there is, then I also believe that you and I disagree on a truth of great importance. And if we believe we disagree, then we have reason for taking sides, arguing with one another, and acting on the basis of our respective beliefs. We thus have a reason for passionate conflict. So relativism would fail to keep the peace, which is its purpose, because it would be rejected by those whose behavior and beliefs it would moderate. So in the second case, suppose we all become relativists. Suppose we say that, okay, the truth of these claims is relevant to our group or me in particular. Suppose we say there's no absolute truth at stake. Well, suppose further that my religious convictions call me to make great sacrifices, whether in giving my life to violent death or in a lifetime of service to others. But if I believe that the truth of these claims is simply dependent on my attitudes, why don't I change my attitudes through a less demanding set of beliefs? My beliefs would be no less true, and I could avoid some really excruciating demands in my life. Here's the point. Relativism solves the problem of religious and moral conflict only by emptying religious beliefs of their ultimacy. It undermines the motivational force of those convictions, the very force that made them a source of such positive and valuable contributions to society. Religious beliefs are important to so many millions because they're seen to issue from the highest authority and speak to what is of highest value in our lives. But relativism tells us that the truth is built on the shifting sands of our attitudes, and the meaning they give us is as transcendent as those attitudes. If we embrace relativism, we recognize that we do not disagree about such beliefs, but we may also discover that we do not care. So that's relativism. I don't think it's the answer. I want to say, I went through that just to set it aside, and what I want to do is just do my best to answer this question I've set for myself. And that question is, how can faith play a role in public life in a way that enables it to serve the good and not be corrupted as a force for bad? I think a final comprehensive answer to this question is beyond what I can do in this address, but I do have 3 key recommendations. And this is sort of my answer to the question. And recommendation 1, religious convictions must not be co-opted by partisan political interests. Success in a democratic system is achieved by building coalitions and ultimately political parties around important issues. As I mentioned earlier, a number of political scientists have argued that the rising prominence of abortion and same-sex marriage in American public debate led to the migration of more religiously motivated voters to the Republican Party and less religiously motivated voters to the Democratic Party. Because these issues touch on such central issues, the sanctity of life, the character of an institution, that it's the very heart of our social life, it's not surprising that they have such a resonance with religious voters. And these issues have profoundly shaped our political life and parties in America. Yet there are 2 dangers, obvious dangers, with aligning religious convictions and communities too closely with a political party. First, some elements of the platform may not align with all our most important convictions. Second, the platform may be silent on values that are of great importance. A devout Catholic, for instance, may want to identify fully with the Democratic Party because she shares the party's desire to help the poor or protect the environment, but she rejects its stance on abortion. Similarly, another Catholic may want to identify wholeheartedly with the Republican Party may not want to identify wholeheartedly with the Republican Party because while he passionately endorses the party's pro-life stance, he cannot embrace its position on, say, immigration. It's part of political life in a democracy that we join coalitions that advance issues we care deeply about while recognizing that they do not serve a number of other issues that are important to us. I am not saying anything against prudential judgments, one way or the other, that lead us to enter coalitions and accede to compromise. My point here is this. As religiously committed people, we must be wary of allowing our religious beliefs, communities, and institutions to be identified with any particular party or agenda. Too close an identification ultimately weakens the religious voice in our society by placing religious convictions at the service of a partisan political agenda. Many people can turn to the person who shares their Christian faith and not their political views and ask, are you with us or against us? As if what defines us is not a shared faith in Christ, but a shared point of view on a matter of politics. It's certainly a good thing that conservative Catholics and evangelicals may come together against abortion. And it's a good thing that liberal Protestants, liberal Catholics, and secular feminists may unite to advance the status of women. But if that cause, whatever it is, becomes central and the religious tradition which supports it is subordinated, then these religious communities and their traditions can come to be seen as mere instruments in advancing a political cause. And if that occurs, then the religious tradition and community becomes incoherent. The integrity of its character as a community of faith is sacrificed to the interests of a partisan agenda. That's recommendation 1. Recommendation 2, practice what I call epistemic, of course, having to do with knowledge. Practice epistemic humility and epistemic charity. What do I mean by that? I am not for a moment arguing here against vigorous advocacy by people of faith for principles that arise from their faith. In a pluralistic democracy, it's essential that each person advances their views in constructive civil discussion and that he or she welcomes those who advance contrary views. The views of those with faith, of course, may be grounded in religion and therefore have for the believer a greater certainty. In the public forum, of course, the believer must give reasons that are accessible to all, that will convince everybody, and their positions must be evaluated on the basis of those reasons. Yet the mere fact that certain positions are grounded in faith can make those who do not share that faith nervous, for they fear that the person of faith may lack the openness to contrary arguments that one would hope for in a dialectical partner, in someone you're talking with. Of course, adherents of secular ideologies have proven just as flexible and resistant to contrary argument as the most ardent religious believer, and a fair and open consideration of contrary perspectives is something we should all practice. But my concern here, what I'm talking about here, is people of faith, and I want to suggest that we all need to learn, cultivate humility about what we claim to be true. It may be true that a belief of mine is inspired by God's revelation, but my understanding and articulation of that truth is subject to human fallibility. Religious traditions with a long history, like the Catholic tradition, have beliefs that have evolved over time. Whether it is the claim that the earth is the center of the universe or that usury is contrary to justice and biblical teaching, we have seen changes in our understanding of what has been divinely revealed and how we understand that revelation. If such a development occurred in the past, we can expect it to occur in the future. Consequently, even when we're speaking about truths we believe to be revealed, the believer should exhibit a certain epistemic humility about what they claim with respect to those claims. With such humility, believers can hold both that their beliefs are grounded in divine revelation and yet also that our understanding of them can grow. A believer then can be open to the same self-criticism, flexibility in public discussions that his or her secular counterpart can show. A second important characteristic is what I'll call epistemic charity. I may be convinced of religious truth, and consequently, if another person denies that truth, I conclude that she or he is wrong. Yet even if that person is mistaken, charity demands that such a person be treated with respect. She or he may not have heard the arguments or understood them or share my faith. In such a case, it would be wrong to condemn or be condescending to such a person. What I'm saying here may appear trite and obvious, but unfortunately it's not a common practice. There's an unsettling tendency in moral debate to portray those who disagree as evil. And otherwise decent people can be unsparing in their personal attacks. Very often, the persuasive force of those who proclaim the gospel is undermined by the obvious hatred in the attacks. My final recommendation 3, recognize the central power of witness. This leads to my final point about the role of faith in public debate. Communities of faith may participate in coalitions to achieve important political ends, and their participation may arise from a common faith and a transcendent commitment. But their primary call is to witness to transcendent truth by the way they live. As their actions have their highest value in testifying to the divine presence at work in the world and in their community. No political end should ever overshadow this call to witness, because no work is more effective than witness in achieving truly religious ends. Indeed, if love is the greatest commandment, then the way we engage one another in public debate is not a means to an end. The means are the end. It's hard to imagine a more politically insignificant group than the generally poor and working class Christians of the Mediterranean world in the first century. Their deaths alone in various persecutions would not have created a public reaction or protest sufficient to threaten the Roman Empire. But it was the courage and the serenity of these Christians facing their excruciating public deaths that spoke most powerfully, and which such a witness that perhaps changed hearts. The same could be said of Martin Luther King Jr., of Sister Mary Scullion and Joan McCannon in Philadelphia, and many others whose witness had a more enduring effect than any short-term policy or legislative change. One of the great risks of political life for Christians is the chance that near-term political goals will undermine our ultimate goal, the call to witness. And I would argue that any act that undercuts our call to witness ultimately undercuts our political cause as well, if that cause is just. Our enduring goal should be the impact that comes when people see Christians or others of faith living the truth of their faith in ways that even non-believers can admire. Some agree with the primary call to witness, but insist that their action is their witness, that advancing a cause in line with religion is witnessing to that religion. But I suggest that all of us of faith would do well to do some soul searching in this season of Lent about how we witness in public debate. I believe we offer our greatest witness in the midst of our most difficult disagreements, when we make a genuine effort to treat the other person with respect, to appeal to common values, and to conscience to win them over. Ultimately, truly Christian attempts to engage one another in public debate must take the form of an effort to persuade. If I feel Christian love and goodwill for the other side, then it would be my duty to persuade them. And if I want to persuade them, how can I villainize them? People are not persuaded by attacks on their character. But if I don't try to persuade you, but only try to prove you wrong, then I'm not showing the respect that love demands. To stand apart, proclaim my position, refuse to talk, accept to judge, does not reduce evil or promote love. And if it does neither, how can we say it's inspired by God? In the end, the challenge that prompted this talk, the question of how to preserve the positive aspect of faith and reduce the negative, all pivots on this matter of witness. Genuine faith calls for a total commitment of one's life. Unlike the shifting commitments of political coalitions that unite groups with overlapping but disparate interests, religious faith asks that we give ourselves fully to God and to be transformed. It shapes our view of the world and does not simply accommodate it. It gives us our purpose and does not simply serve our interests. In T.S. Eliot's play, Murder in the Cathedral, Archbishop Thomas Becket returns to England, having been exiled to France by King Henry II after a series of confrontations over the rights of the church as against the king. Under pressure from Pope Alexander III, King Henry allows Becket to return to England as Archbishop, setting up the final confrontation. That ends in political failure, but a martyr's triumph, as Becket is murdered in Canterbury Cathedral by 4 knights who believe they're doing the king's will. Becket is immediately revered as a martyr, and King Henry is compelled to do penance at Becket's tomb. As that play opens, while a chorus of women anxiously await Becket's return to Canterbury, they chant, Destiny waits in the hands of God, not in the hands of statesmen who do some well, some ill, planning and guessing, having their aims turn in their hands according to the pattern of time. Those of us with faith must engage in political confrontations and do our best planning and guessing and maneuvering to see that critical interests are served. But for us, the most important struggle is to remain true to the call of faith and thus to witness, while humbly accepting that destiny does indeed wait in the hands of God. Thank you very much.
Those of you who have questions, please feel free to write them on cards, and the ushers will collect them and bring them forward so that we can ask them. And just keep your hands up with your cards so that we can continue to collect them. Thank you very much for your interest in this. While they're being collected, I'll start with the first question, if I may.
Sure, please.
Thank you so much for that remarkable address, and one that touched me deeply and with which I agree profoundly, from a Methodist tradition in rural Alabama. So I'm glad that
That's
Christian
great.
Minds can come to some
Absolutely.
agreement in that regard. I wanted to ask you about spiritual disciplines. Some of my deepest meditations have been on pondering how I might find the light of Christ or the face of Christ in those who are so diametrically opposed to my deepest core Christian beliefs that it's hard for me to imagine that they really are Christians. But they call themselves Christians, and they belong to a tradition that is obviously Christian. And I'm wondering what you can share with us from your own personal experience of a spiritual discipline of pondering the Christ conviction and witness of those whom you have a hard time believing are really Christian.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question, Jan, and I speak as one who can speak theoretically, but in practice I'm challenged, I'm sure, as much or more than anyone here. But, you know, I'm reminded of a story of a monk who had gone into a monastery and had a spiritual director, and after several months at this monastery, he goes into a spiritual director, and the spiritual director asks, "How are things going?" And he says, "Everything's great. My prayer is going great. I feel so fulfilled here, and everything's great." He says, "But there's just this one guy who's I just can't stand him, and he just makes my day miserable. It kind of throws me off my meditation." And he said, "That's my only issue." And the spiritual director says, "Whatever you do, thank God for that person, because he can teach you genuine love, rather than simply the good feelings that often come with religion." I guess I don't have great wisdom, but what wisdom I have is I think the people often we find most difficult are God's gift to us to help us learn to love. And you know, it's easy to love people who are great and we enjoy their company, but it's hardest to learn to love precisely the people you talk about. And so it may be a great source of prayer I mean, just to kind of focus on that and one's response to that, and the fact that that person too is God's gift and a child of God. So that's the best wisdom I have.
Thank you. This comes from Mark. Religious identity certainly seems to be important in contemporary politics. For example, the debates about President Obama being either Muslim or radical Christian, or Governor Romney being Mormon. Do religious arguments remain important, though? I heard little religious language in either the budget debates recently in the last election. Might your third guideline on witness exacerbate this separation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what's the role of religious arguments in our public debate? I mean, one challenge, obviously, is that we live in a religiously pluralistic society. So I can talk about my Catholic faith, but it may not convince or resonate with someone who's Jewish or an atheist. And so how do we do that? I guess it is important to find ways to express goods, values that transcend any particular religious denomination. So I guess maybe that's an answer. I mean, it's sometimes overtly kind of religious language can alienate as much as persuade, but I think we can talk about compassion. I mean, I think anybody who's a follower of Christ believes in compassion for people, and so we can talk about that as a value we want to hold up, and maybe other people would embrace that, or our responsibility to one another in a society. I mean, that may be another value. So what I am saying here is, kind of overtly religious arguments can be a challenge, but we have to be creative enough to find values that we all, or at least most of us, can embrace and motivate one another to action.
And maybe civil discourse is one of those.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is from Craig. Given that a recent poll showed 70+% of Catholics support same-sex marriage when defined as a civil union, might Catholic universities play a role in moderating this great divide between lay conscience-formed opinion and the bishop's teaching? If so, how?
Talk about polarizing issues. 2 points that I don't think the person who asked that question or any of us would disagree with. One is that we are called as people of faith to have compassion for people with same-sex orientation, and that is central to who we are, and there can't be any question about that. And I think it's pretty, I don't know if anyone would claim that that's a choice. People just have that orientation, and they shouldn't be marginalized. They should be treated with Christian love, and even more, because they often have challenges that heterosexual people don't have. So that has to be one. I think the other value is just what is marriage? What is marriage? And there's a long tradition of that, and that's the nub. That's the challenge. Now, the questioner suggested civil unions, and I mean that is a marriage, and that may be a way forward to address this issue. And what can Catholic universities do? I mean, it's a good question, and it's something we struggle with at Notre Dame, and I'm sure other Catholic universities struggle with. And it is, one of the great challenges I face is Philip mentioned. I mean, Notre Dame is this prominent place, and so you have to issues that you want to take up to do good often become this political lightning rod, and I have to kind of make sure, what does this say symbolically as well as really? But I'm not giving a kind of very direct answer to the question. I know I'm dancing around up here, but there are. It is. I would disagree with you when you say it's a simple solution, but I think we have to continue to be creative to support people of same-sex orientation and to show compassion to them.
This is from Laura in Atlanta, who's the parent of an Emory student and a lifelong Catholic. When Notre Dame students ask you about the prospect of women being ordained as priests, I thought we'd go from gays and lesbians to women here. It'll get softer in a minute,
Okay,
sorry.
That's okay, I can take it.
So when Notre Dame students ask you about the prospect of women being ordained as priests, how do you answer them?
Not my call. I mean, that is it's part of being a faith community, that, you just, you make, these things are decided in a community. And so, sometimes I guess it becomes this sort of a polarizing issue. But, I do think there are so many ways in which women, men, lay people, religious clergy can contribute to the church. And I think rather than kind of beating your head against that issue, I hope people find ways to do that. So I guess that's the best answer I have to them.
Cardinal Casper had the same problem.
Yeah. He's closer to the guy who...
He's closer to the guy, yeah. This is from Itonde, who works with the Carter Center here in Atlanta. Is it possible to measure the efficacy of martyrdom? Consider this in light of the Maccabean revolt and St. Stephen, in contrast to the London bombers and the religious passions of those who committed the acts in September 11th.
Yeah, so the efficacy, as I understand the question, the efficacy of martyrdom, well, what about these bombers? Well, again, to bomb innocent people, to kill innocent people in a suicide bombing, it seems that's hardly what, it seems the worst perversion of what martyrdom is. And I don't say that with any disrespect, obviously, to Islam. I think Muslims would say that too, because it's not taking on oneself the suffering, but it's hurting others. I mean, that's the thing about a martyr. A martyr takes on him or herself the suffering to transform others. But when martyrdom is used as an act of destruction, it's sort of the exact opposite of what genuine martyrdom is. So that's what I'd say to that. And I guess my point about martyrdom is that witness of genuine martyrdom, I mean, genuinely giving your life, is powerful in that it changes hearts of people. And if you're killing people, if you're destroying people's lives, that's the opposite of genuine martyrdom.
Thank you. Last year, Cardinal Casper concluded his talk with a challenge to speak of God often in our daily lives. Should speaking of God be the basis for finding His will in the course of difficult dialogue? And this is from Bill in Alabama.
Yeah, it could be. But people, obviously, if you're going to talk to someone who's a non-believer, it depends how you approach it. But it could be off-putting if you sort of, I believe in God, put that front and center, and I just want you to know that. So, yeah, in a way, it's how could we understand? I mean, first, any communication, the first step in any communication is understanding the person you're talking to. How is he going to hear, or she going to hear what I say? And so it may be that talking of God is what you should do if you do it in the right way, but it may not be. It's all how is the message going to be received. And it does seem to me that's part of any respectful conversation, right? I understand the sensibilities of the person I'm talking with. and I respect those. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to say certain things, but I may say things in different ways or at a different time, depending on those sensibilities. So I don't think there's a general answer to that, but it all depends on the context and the people you're trying to get through to.
This is from Mary in Alpharetta. How do you dialogue with those who won't dialogue with you?
Well, you don't. But again, I mean, you can't dialogue. But I think, so what do? I guess all you do is try to live the faith and the values that you believe in. And I don't know, I think that's your best shot at changing people's hearts. And but obviously, if people don't want to dialogue, there's little you can do. But unless we live in this pluralistic democracy, unless we can find a way to have constructive conversations, we're in bad shape. We can't find the solutions before us. And so there's no option but to keep trying.
So this is, I don't have the name of the person here, but it says, while true destiny awaits in God's hands, God also invites us to give witness by being his feet and hands. How can we better incarnate this call to give witness in the public arena? How can we better collaborate and be co-workers with God?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, we have in the Catholic tradition, as most of you know, there's this idea of a calling, a vocation we're called. And I do believe that every Christian has a calling. Every Christian has a vocation. And how you are going to be God's, hands and feet depends on your abilities, your interests, where you find your place in life. And then to do it in a way that speaks of God. My father was a physician, and he wasn't a person who would overtly talk about. He was a person of faith, but he wasn't overtly religious. But I worked in the hospital, and just the way he cared about the patients he served, he'd sit down and talk to them, he'd listen to them, and he was beloved by his patients because of that. And I just saw in that a kind of way of doing your job. He was a doctor. That was really God's work. Of course, the danger is that we can, be deceived into saying something is God's work when in fact is our interests at play. But that's the challenge of the Christian life. What is your calling? What are you doing in life? Where can you make a contribution? And then to do that in a way that's informed by the gospel and that speaks of God's love, that shows that love to others. Each of us has to answer that question for ourselves, and we'll all do it in different ways. That's the best answer I have for that.
This is from Joe in Atlanta. Is the decline of Catholicism in the developed world about the rise of relativism? How does one debate the relativist when they don't recognize belief?
Yeah, it's a profound question, and it may be that there's a deep relativism. I mean, if you sort of deeply buy into relativist view, you don't think anything is ultimate. Everything is sort of relative to one's attitudes, and I think God in some way is that which is ultimate, right? That which created all things and is uncreated, that which is the source of truth and the source of being. And so that may be a profound insight. I need to think about it. That really is at the core of it, and that really is the challenge we face. What's the second part of the question?
How does one debate the relativist when they don't recognize belief?
I think you have to just engage them in debate. But ultimately, relativism is self-defeating, I believe, because relativists generally want to make pretty strong claims that are non-relativistic about how we ought to act and what we ought to do. And generally, I think they get caught in that. I mean, the thing about relevance is sort of intellectually easy answer to disagreements. Oh, well, truth for you, truth for me. My students say that, and I always challenge them, that's the lazy man's answer to difficult questions. And so I think, but ultimately, if you pursue it, I think you find it just doesn't work. It doesn't it doesn't give us the understanding of the claims that we want to give it. And so I think that's the issue. If you can get there's this wonderful, I always recommend this letter, in the Screwtape Letter, C.S. Lewis's wonderful book about fiction, about faith. And the point of this first letter is that the challenge to faith is not that we think too much, is that we think too little. We don't press the questions far enough. We're satisfied with the surface understanding. And I have to say, there are probably relativists in the audience that are angry at me, but I think relativism is that kind of surface understanding that seems to solve problems, but as you think more about it, it doesn't work. So that's what I'd say in response, your response to the relativists. Just keep the conversation going, keep asking questions.
And go deep.
Go deep, yeah.
Go deep. Well, President Jenkins, I just want to...
I got one last question. Sorry. You've had so many easy questions that... Terry Brennan, is Terry here? Terry, he wants to bring his passion and conviction to a really important topic, which apparently has been left out of this conversation. And it's a sort of a teleological question. So if you could answer, what will Notre Dame do in football this year? Terry would like the answer. So,
Philip, you mentioned the importance of Notre Dame in the minds of American Catholics, but nothing's more than the football team and the sort of the success of it. Everything hangs on it. But I am bullish on our football team. I think we have a great coach. I think we will have a great season. I'm not going to give you a record, but I think you can look for good things. Thanks. Oh, thank you. That's too kind. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks. You're too kind. That's too kind. Thank you. Too kind. Thank you very much. But I do want to say, I just thought, in that regard, that was great. I hope you watched our women's basketball team this year. They did real well.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.